So I'm just thinking, what gift can one give to democracy? In a manner of speaking, of course. I mean, if democracy had a list of items it would want for Christmas, what would they be? If I could hazard a guess, I would say that one gift democracy would appreciate is a credible and almost infallible electoral system. But as it stands right now, we obviously have not given our democracy that gift yet in Nigeria. If you take a look at the violence, voter inducement, voter apathy, and overall conduct of elections in the nation, you might agree that we have work to do. How much? Well, the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which has passed second reading at the National Assembly, lays out some of the areas we need to improve on. So let's take a look at some of those areas. They include the accommodation of new technology in accreditation of voters. Now, that is key. The reduction in nomination fees charged by political parties. You know the talk about our democracy being very expensive? Well, that's also another point. The next one is empowering INEC with powers to suspend election in order to allow a political party that lost its candidate before or during an election conduct a fresh primary for replacements. Remember that issue came up a few years back. Another major one is prohibition of party members from taking up employment in INEC. Well, that makes sense. And publishing a voters register for public scrutiny at every registration area and its website 7 days before a general election. So these are some of the issues that have been brought up in this Electoral Act Amendment Bill. I would like to take a look at this much further. Let's join our guests tonight to help us get a sense of where we are and where we need to be. We're being joined by Mr. Osaze-Uzzi. He's the Director of Voter Education at INEC. He joins us from our Abuja studio, as well as Mr. Samson Itodo, the Director of Yiaga Africa. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the program this Boxing Day.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Now, let me begin with Mr. Osaze-Uzzi. Now, we have seen that the 2019 election year is over, obviously. But, taking a look at these recommendations or proposals from the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, you see that one issue that sticks out is the accommodation of new technology in accreditation of voters. But some will say it is not just accreditation of voters, it's across the whole value chain of election in the country. So how much technology deficit do we have in our election process right now?
Thank you very much, and compliments of the season to you and your viewers. When you talk about deficit, as if there's something lacking. The truth of the matter is that over the years, INEC has steadily, the building blocks for full-blown technological intervention in our electoral process has been built over the years. So it started, for example, with the introduction of the electronic register of voters. Because before you talk of anything electronic, the base must be established, and a register of voters is the very base of all of the electoral process. So that has been, we've accomplished that with a very high degree of certainty and fidelity to the register of voters. We have that. The next thing we did was to establish the card reader, so that the PVC, first of all, because the electronic card with smart card was the next step, and then the card reader, which could read that card, read the biometrics of the registered voters. So there's been a gradual process, but we've also, there's this controversy over the place of the card reader because it was not entrenched into the Electoral Act. It was just a guideline of the Commission. That is a bylaw. There was a call and the interpretation of the Supreme Court, and that, look, this should be part of the Electoral Act for it to take precedence over the manual process. So that, I think, is part of the mischief, if you call it that the new bill, amendment bill, wishes to address. So that is one thing. There's the transmission of results and collation. If you look at the Electoral Act as it stands now, it's a manual process. You must do it manually.
Mr. Osaze-Uzzi, I'll let you land on that point. We have to, take a break right now. And when we return from this break, we'll also bring in Mr. Samson Itodo to help us understand how much of a deficit we have and some other issues which have been raised in the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. To join us again. So we're still talking about the perfect gift for democracy in Nigeria, and I hazarded a guess saying that perhaps it will be a good and effective electoral system. So let's rejoin our guest in Abuja, Mr. Osaze-Uzzi, is the Director of Voter Education for INEC, and Mr. Samson Itodo, Director of Yiaga Africa. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So, Mr. Osaze-Uzzi, let me just let you land on that before we bring in Mr. Itodo into this conversation.
So as I was saying before we went on the break, it's to ensure that a lot more technology is introduced in the process. But looking at the bill, there seems to be a duality. Both the manual processes still will run apparently next to the electronic process. But many of these things we're already doing will now be entrenched into the Electoral Act. It now becomes statutory, not just a bylaw. Although there's a clause there saying that electronic voting, that INEC can do electronic voting, I don't know how effective that clause in that bill will be, considering that there's a step-by-step process, which is a manual process. So in my own personal view, we seem to be building an electronic superstructure, but it might be on a manual foundation. So that's something we have to look at. But the Commission is studying the bill, will come out with its own position and engage with the National Assembly and the Executive on ways forward to bridge the deficit in that process, the electronic process, introducing electronic process into our process.
Right. So, Mr. Itodo, from your perspective, how much of technology deficit do you think we have in our electoral system in the country?
Well, it's not necessarily about technology deficit. It's about how effective and to what extent are the technological innovations that INEC has introduced in our electoral process deepen the integrity of our elections. And Mr. Uzzi has highlighted a couple, the smart card readers, the electronic register of voters. To a large extent, they've contributed to deepening the integrity of our process. But there are other aspects of our elections that we need increased deployment of technology. And one central one is the electronic transmission of results. As we know, INEC had been piloting electronic transmission of results in off-cycle elections that it had. We're at a point now where INEC needs to tell Nigerians, what did we learn from this pilot process of the electronic transmission of results? How did the technology fare? Are there gaps? Are there lessons that we can learn? And let's have a national conversation that ahead of the 2023, there will be need for us to adopt electronic transmission of results. This bill, if passed, as sponsored by the Deputy Senate President, it will confer legality on electronic transmission of results. And I strongly support that we deploy technology to transmit results electronically. Because if you do that, what you saw in places like Bayelsa and Kogi in the last elections, we won't have such occurrences anymore because technology would limit the either exercise of discretion in undermining the collation process, which overall undermines the integrity of our elections. Okay. But it's also critical that as stakeholders, as we talk about technology and electoral integrity, we must also keep in mind that these machines that we advocate for deployment in our electoral process also have their vulnerabilities. What we don't want is computer-generated leaders from our elections. Because the more you deploy technology, don't forget that human beings still manage these technologies. Right. And so there have to be mechanisms that ensure that as we talk about electoral integrity through the deployment of technology, there are also safeguards that ensures that we don't get computer-generated leaders out of our elections, okay, or leaders that are voted into power because majority of voters went to cast their vote.
Right. So another issue I'd like us to take a look is the cost of democracy, or in this case, election process. And if another issue which is raised, I mean, that bill, the amendment bill has raised is the cost, trying to perhaps reduce the cost. If you take a look at, for example, the nomination forms across the two main political parties in the country, for the APC, for example, you see presidential nomination form costs a total of 12 million naira. For the governorship, it costs about 6 million naira in total. Now look at the APC, a total of 45 million naira, and for governorship, 22.5 million naira. So, Mr. Osaze-Uzzi, seeing these figures, well, it's been a controversial topic, honestly, but from INEC's perspective, would you say that this is too expensive?
Well, quite honestly, it's not for the regulator to say whether fees charged by political parties are expensive or not. I believe there must be some basis for which the parties arrive at those figures. since our laws do not allow us to put a cap on nomination fees, because the Electoral Act specifically excludes nomination fees as part of the computation of cost of elections in terms of how much a maximum a candidate should spend, we have not really considered that very well. But we have listened to civil society, we have listened to people who have raised concerns about it. Whether that there should be a statutory limit is something we don't have an official position for. But there's a problem with that for me personally, and that is, look, if you put a fixed sum now, if you have to change that sum to face the realities of the day, in 10 years' time, that sum may appear paltry considering the inflation. Then you have to go and amend the Electoral Act again. Personally, I think the Electoral Act ought to be a framework piece of legislation, and things like that, you allow the discretion to the commission, or as some countries do, put a formula, looking at the number of voters there are, number of party members and things like that, put a formula which you apply rather than put a fixed sum. That is a personal view. The commission does not have an official view on that, not yet anyway.
All right. So, Mr. Itodo, looking at those figures, do you think there's a danger in having such amount as nomination forms, or it's part of democracy?
It is unacceptable that political parties that should be platforms for political aspiration and participation peg these exorbitant fees for their nomination forms and sundry fees. It's really unacceptable, and that's the bane of our problem. You've got a leadership recruitment process that is highly commercialized, and that's why we've got this kind of leaders that we have today, who are not loyal to the fidelity of our Constitution, but they care more about the fact that they want to recoup the investments that they make while they are running for office. Why should you charge a candidate for 45 million naira or 20 million naira just for party nomination forms? It's my view that this is just an approach adopted by the political parties to continue to, one, exclude people who have competence, who have capacity for running for office. They want to maintain power at all costs. And so they introduce these mechanisms because they want public office to be exclusive for their own group or set of people. And so women, people with disabilities, and young people are shut from aspiring to run for office because of this high cost. The second is the corruption in our elections. If you look at party primaries are signposted by either violence or money politics. We know how delegates in this country go for conventions, and most of them come back either becoming car owners or they are bought with foreign currencies, dollars and pounds, and it just makes a mockery of our democracy. Right. Democracy and public leadership should be a process where only individuals who have capacity, who have competence, who have character should vie. But today, party nomination or public leadership is defined, one, your capacity for violence and the amount of money that you can spend. So what you have in public office today are the highest bidders and the highest spenders who are able to deploy resources to secure party nominations and get into office. And that's why when they're in office, they are not accountable to the people because they already bought their way. And so this innovation in the Electoral Act will cushion, to a large extent, this exclusion and reduce the tension within our electoral process. But we should get to a point where parties don't need to charge candidates or aspirants this amount of money for just securing party nomination.
All right. I do hope we succeed in giving our democracy this all-important gift of free, fair, and credible electioneering process. But I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi. He is the Director of Voter Education at INEC, and Mr. Samson Itodo, the Director of Yaga Africa. Thank you for taking time off your Yuletide to join us on this program tonight. So that's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I am Kayode Okikolu, but don't forget, you can always watch this on YouTube. That's right, Channels Television. That's our channel. You get access to all our content dating as far back as years ago and all that. So that's our gift to you. Have a great night ahead.